It was a quiet Sunday morning. The sun had just begun to fill the small living room with a warm, golden light. I stood near the window, watching the sunlight touch the white curtains. The house was peaceful. My 6-year-old son, Arav, was sitting on the floor, building a tower with his toy blocks. The smell of coffee filled the air. I smiled softly. Mornings like these felt safe, simple, gentle, and calm. It had been almost a year since Armin and I had separated. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. I had learned how to manage the house, my job, and my little boy, all on my own. Then, a sudden knock at the door. I froze. For a moment, I thought it might be the mailman or a neighbor, but something about that knock felt familiar, slow, firm, the kind of knock that carried memories. My heart gave a small, strange jump inside my chest. I turned toward the door, hesitating. Arav looked up from the floor, his face lighting up. "Mommy! Daddy!" he shouted, jumping to his feet and running toward the door. My breath caught in my throat. My hand reached out as if to stop him, but it was too late. Arav was already pulling the door open with his little hands, and there he was, Armin. He stood in the doorway, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. His hair was a little messy, his face tired, but his eyes, they were still the same. The same deep brown eyes that once made me feel safe, seen, and completely loved. For a moment no one spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken memories, with all the years we'd shared and the year we'd been apart. "Hi," he said softly, his voice almost unsure. I forced a small smile. "Hi." Arav hugged his father's leg tightly. "Daddy, you came." Armin bent down, wrapping his arms around our son. His voice trembled just slightly. "Of course I did, buddy. I missed you." I turned toward the kitchen, needing an escape. "I'll make coffee," I said quietly. My voice was calm, but my mind was a storm. He hadn't called. I wasn't prepared for this. For him, for the rush of feelings that came with his presence. I walked into the kitchen, the sound of cups clinking filling the silence. From the living room I could hear Armin and Arav laughing, their voices weaving together in a melody I hadn't heard in so long. That sound, their voices together, made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. It was so beautiful, and so painful. When I returned with 2 cups of coffee, Armin was sitting on the couch helping Arav fix a toy. He looked up as I entered, his gaze lingering for a second longer than it should have. "You still take coffee the same way?" I asked softly, handing him a mug. "2 spoons of sugar," he replied with a faint smile. "You remember?" I looked down at my own cup. "I remember a lot of things," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We sat across from each other, a heavy silence growing between us. Arav was playing on the floor, lost in his own little world, completely unaware of the quiet storm brewing between his parents. Armin looked around the room. "You changed the place. It looks warmer now." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," I replied. "I wanted it to feel like home." He nodded slowly. "You've done a good job." Our eyes met again, just for a heartbeat. But in that single look so much passed between us, regret, longing, confusion, maybe even a flicker of the love that used to be everything. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching into an eternity. For a moment, the years between us just disappeared. It was like nothing had changed, like we were still the same couple who used to share coffee on quiet mornings, whispering our dreams to each other. But reality always has a way of returning. I cleared my throat, breaking the spell. "So, you're here to see Arav?" It was a safe question, a practical one. "Yes," he said gently. "I wanted to spend some time with him today, if that's okay." "Of course," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "He's missed you." "I've missed him too," Armin said. He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "And I've missed you." I froze. My fingers tightened around my warm cup. I looked away quickly, pretending not to hear, but the sudden warmth spreading through my chest betrayed my calm face. The words hung in the air, charged and heavy. I couldn't deal with them. Not now. "I'll go take a shower," I said quietly, standing up on shaky legs. "You two, have fun." As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor. Behind me, I could hear Armin's gentle laughter as he played with our son. But in my mind, that one line kept replaying, over and over. "I've missed you." The morning, once so calm and ordinary, now felt different. It was charged, uncertain, and suddenly alive again with possibilities I had locked away long ago. Outside, a light breeze rustled the curtains. Inside, the air carried both the warmth of a reunion and the tension of what was left unsaid. Some doors once opened never really close again. The rain began to fall, painting soft patterns on the windows as Arav's bright, pure laughter filled the small living room. It was the kind of sound that could melt any sadness. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my sleeves rolled up, hands dotted with blue paint trying to fix my son's toy car. He was giving me commands like a tiny boss. "Daddy, no, not like that," Arav giggled. "You're putting the wheel on wrong." I chuckled, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, really? And who taught you that?" "Mommy," he said proudly. "Mommy can fix anything." I paused, my smile softening. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She always could." A light roll of thunder echoed outside as the gentle tap of rain grew steady. In the kitchen, Lena heard us. She leaned against the wall, listening. Every giggle, every word brought back memories of old mornings when the three of us were together, laughing over burnt toast and spilled juice. She closed her eyes, trying to shake away the lingering ache, that strange warmth that refused to leave. Pouring some tea, she stood by the window, her reflection calm, but her heart anything but. Back in the living room, I finally got the toy working. "There, it's fixed," I announced proudly. Arav clapped his hands. "Daddy, you're the best." I laughed softly. "No, your mom is the best. I'm just trying to catch up." The boy giggled and ran toward the kitchen. "Mommy, Daddy fixed it." Lena turned, a faint smile on her face. "That's good, sweetheart." Her eyes lifted and met mine. I was standing in the doorway, watching her. In this light, I looked different. Older, gentler. The kind of tired that comes from missing someone for too long. For a few seconds, only the rain filled the silence. Then Arav broke it. "Mommy, Daddy's hungry. Can we make him pancakes?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. "Pancakes?" I smiled awkwardly. "You still make those? The cinnamon ones?" "Sometimes," she said, turning back toward the counter. "When I have time." Arav jumped up and down. "Please, Mommy, please." She couldn't say no to that face. "Fine," she said with a small laugh. "But you're helping." The kitchen came alive again. Arav stood on a small stool, holding a spoon. I leaned against the counter, watching Lena move, the way she poured the batter, the way she smiled when the pancakes puffed up. I remembered how I used to stand in this same spot, teasing her about burning breakfast, kissing the flour off her cheek. The memory hit harder than I expected. "You haven't changed," I said quietly. Lena didn't look up. "Everyone changes, Armin. Not you," I replied. "You still make everything feel like home." The words hung in the air. Arav was too busy with the syrup to notice, but Lena's hands froze for a second. She set the plate down carefully, pretending to focus. She didn't reply, but her heart was loud, louder than the rain, louder than the ticking clock. Soon, we were all sitting at the table, the three of us together for the first time in a long while. Arav chattered non-stop about school, his friends, his new favorite cartoon. I listened like every word was a treasure, laughing at his silly jokes, smiling every time Lena gently corrected his grammar. It almost felt normal again. Almost. When breakfast ended, Arav ran to his room to grab a storybook. The moment he left, the silence between us returned, heavier now. I looked at her. "He's growing fast." "Yes," she said softly. "Too fast." He looks like you, I added. Same smile, same eyes. Lena glanced at me, a small smirk appearing on her lips. And your stubbornness. I chuckled quietly. Guess he got the best from both of us. She looked at me then, really looked at me. For a heartbeat, the old warmth flickered between us, fragile but real. Then Arav came running back, jumping into my lap. Daddy, can you read this with me? Of course, I said, smiling. Let's do it together. Lena stood in the doorway watching us. Her heart ached in that strange, bittersweet way again, a mix of happiness and sorrow. She turned away slowly, whispering to herself, Don't fall again, Lena, don't. But as she walked toward her room, she could still hear our laughter. Pure, innocent, healing. It filled the house like sunlight after rain. And for the first time in months, Lena realized something. She wasn't just missing the man she loved, she was missing the family they once were. The house had grown still again after breakfast. Arav was asleep on the couch, his small hand still holding the corner of his storybook. The only sounds left were the steady rain against the window and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I stood by the kitchen counter, my hands gently wiping the last plate. I wasn't looking at Armin, but I could feel his presence, sitting at the dining table behind me, quiet, thoughtful. It was the same silence we used to share long ago, the kind that spoke too many words without saying any. Do you want coffee? I asked softly, my back still turned to him. Armin hesitated for a moment, then a faint smile touched his lips. Yeah, I'd like that. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee soon filled the air. It was warm and comforting, a little too comforting for a morning that felt like a storm raging inside both of us. I poured 2 cups and walked over to the table, placing one in front of him. For a fraction of a second, our fingers brushed. It was a light accidental touch, but it made both of us freeze. Thanks, he said quickly, trying to sound casual. I just nodded, taking the seat opposite him. The ticking of the clock on the wall filled the heavy silence between us. We just sat there, 2 people who once shared everything, now acting like strangers trying to be polite. The steam from our coffee rose slowly, blurring our faces like a quiet fog of memories. It was Armin who broke the silence first. You still make it the same way, he said, sipping carefully. Strong, but sweet. A small smile escaped me. Old habits don't change easily. Some shouldn't, he murmured. His eyes lifted to mine, just for a moment, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, pretending to fix my hair. So, how's work? He laughed softly. Busy. Tiring, but it helps me keep my mind off things. What kind of things? I asked, and then realized my voice had softened far too much. Armand hesitated. You, him, us. My hand tightened around my cup. I looked down, trying to hide the storm that was rising in my eyes. Armand, please. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay, I interrupted gently. It's just complicated. We fell into silence again. The rain outside seemed to echo our thoughts, soft, steady, and endless. Just then, Arav's small voice broke the moment. Mommy, Daddy, he mumbled in his sleep, turning slightly on the couch. Both of us looked at him at the exact same time, and our eyes met again. That one look held everything we couldn't bring ourselves to say out loud. Armin smiled, but it was a sad smile. He dreams about us together. I swallowed hard. Kids remember love even when adults forget it. The words hung in the air between us, a quiet, undeniable truth. Armin leaned back in his chair. Do you think we really forgot it? I looked at him then, really looked at him. His face was older, yes, lined with a tiredness I recognized, but there was still that softness, that kindness I used to love so much. We had to, I whispered. For peace. He nodded slowly. And did you find peace? My lips trembled. I found silence, not peace. The raw honesty of that moment made the air heavy. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. alive with something neither of us dared to name. Armin took another sip of his coffee, his hand shaking just slightly. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, "if I had just stayed that night, maybe things would be different." "You didn't stay," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "You walked away." He looked down at the table. "I know, and I've hated myself every day for it." My eyes softened. "Armin, we were both broken. Sometimes love isn't enough to fix two people who don't know how to fix themselves." He nodded. "Maybe. But still, when I saw you this morning, my heart began to race." "Don't." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and intense. "I can't help it, Lena. You're still—" I stood up quickly, cutting him off. "I'll check on Arav," I said, my voice shaking just enough to betray my calm facade. I walked to the couch, my bare feet soft against the wooden floor. Arav was sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I brushed a hand over his hair, trying to steady my own breathing. Behind me, Armin sat quietly, watching my silhouette in the dim morning light. There was something so familiar about me, the way I moved, the gentleness in my every action. It was the same grace that had made him fall in love with me all those years ago. He whispered so softly I almost missed it. "You're still my home." I turned back slightly. "Did you say something?" He shook his head, forcing a smile. "No. Just talking to myself." I nodded slowly. "You always did that when you were nervous." He let out a quiet laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess some habits never change either." I almost smiled again, but caught myself. "Maybe that's the problem," I said softly, walking past him toward the kitchen. For a moment, the sound of my footsteps faded, leaving only the rain, the ticking clock, and the slow cooling of 2 untouched coffee cups. Then, faintly, my voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Arman, don't let the coffee get cold." He looked down at his cup, a sad smile on his face. "It already has." The house stood still, filled with love, regret, and a silence that said more than any word ever could. The day had turned gray, a gentle, diffused light filling the rooms. Arav was still asleep on the couch, his blanket half fallen, a small toy car clutched tightly in his hand. The air in the apartment smelled of coffee and rain, a scent that was warm and calm, yet strangely heavy, thick with unspoken things. Lena stood near the hallway, her hand resting against the cool wall. She caught her reflection in a glass picture frame, tired eyes, damp hair framing a face that carried stories no one could read. She felt the silence of the morning pressing against her chest, a familiar weight. She needed a moment, just one quiet minute to breathe, to find her center before the day truly began. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the bathroom. Her soft footsteps on the wooden floor were the only sound, save for the distant creak of a door opening. Inside, she turned on the shower. Water rushed down, hitting the tiles like soft, scattered applause. Steam began to fill the small space, curling upward, fogging the mirror until her reflection was just a soft blur. For a moment, Lena closed her eyes and let the warmth run down her shoulders. The water covered her skin like a protective blanket, and for the first time that morning she felt her racing thoughts fade into a gentle silence. She didn't hear Armin at first. He was still in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch, a ghost in his own past. His eyes had drifted to the collection of photo frames on the shelf, old pictures captured years ago in a different lifetime. One of them showed Lena, her head thrown back in laughter as she held a much smaller, giggling Arav in her arms. He smiled faintly, tracing the outline of her face in the air with his fingers. "She hasn't changed," he whispered to himself, the words barely a sound in the quiet room. The faint, echoing sound of the shower water finally reached his ears, pulling him back to the present. He stood up, his movements stiff, intending to grab his coat and leave quietly before the familiar tide of emotions could rise and overwhelm him. But as he passed by the hallway, he stopped. The sound of the shower was clearer now, soft, rhythmic, steady. The bathroom door was ajar, steam curling out into the corridor like a beckoning mist. He froze, the air around him seeming to thicken, to hold its breath. For a second, a powerful instinct urged him to turn away, to give her space, to honor the fragile, unspoken peace that existed between them. But then, through the small gap in the doorway, he saw her reflection in the fogged mirror. It was just an outline, faint, blurred, a figure wrapped in light and shadow, but it was enough. Her movements were slow, graceful, almost dreamlike. Water glistened across her shoulders like 1,000 tiny captured stars. It wasn't what he saw that held him there, rooted to the spot. It was the feeling that came with it, a deep resonant ache of remembering how close they used to be, how she once laughed breathless when he'd tickle her near the kitchen sink, how she used to hum softly under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Armin stepped back from the door, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He leaned his forehead against the cool wall, closing his eyes, trying to steady the tremor in his hands. "Stop," he whispered to the empty hallway. "Just stop." But memories have a way of disobeying reason. He could almost feel her warmth again, radiating through the wall. He could almost smell the faint, clean scent of the jasmine soap she always used. It was the same scent that was now filling the air, weaving its way into his senses, pulling him under. Inside, Lena turned off the water, the sudden silence almost deafening. She reached for a towel, wrapping it snugly around herself, and began to hum softly, a habit she'd never lost, a way to fill the quiet spaces. Her thoughts drifted to the man sitting just beyond the wall, the same man she had once loved with every fiber of her being, the man she had lost, and the man she had tried so desperately to forget. She hadn't forgotten. Not even close. When she opened the bathroom door, steam followed her out like a ghost trailing in her wake. Armin was still in the hallway, half turned toward the front door, caught in the act of pretending he wasn't just standing there seconds ago. Their eyes met. The air between them felt electric, charged with something old and potent and dangerous. "Armin," she said softly, her voice the first to break the tension. She clutched the towel a little tighter. "What are you doing here?" He blinked as if startled from a dream, his own voice unsteady. I was just about to leave. I didn't mean to." His words trailed off, lost in the heavy air. Her expression softened, the guarded look melting from her eyes. "It's okay," she whispered, offering a small, fragile piece. "You don't have to explain." He looked down at the floor, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. "I heard the water," he admitted quietly. "It just reminded me." Lena's eyes searched his face, wanting to understand, needing to. "Reminded you of what?" He met her gaze slowly, his own eyes filled with a vulnerable, aching sincerity. "Of when things were still beautiful." The words hit her not like a thunderclap, but like a quiet, devastating storm. She wanted to look away, to break the connection, but she couldn't. There was a raw, real, painful truth in his eyes that held her captive. "I should go," he said finally, the words a dismissal of the moment, but his feet didn't move. She took a small step forward, the old wooden floor creaking beneath her bare feet. "Armin," she said, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the silence. "You don't have to keep running from the past." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the woman he once called his forever, standing there in the soft morning light and billowing steam, looking so fragile and yet impossibly strong. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm of years and hurt between them, but his throat closed around the words. Then, from the living room, a sleepy little voice called out, shattering the fragile bubble around them. "Daddy?" The moment broke. They both turned toward the sound, the spell of silence dissolving instantly into the sharp clarity of reality. Lena gave a small, almost trembling smile. "He's awake." Armin nodded slowly, his voice quiet, distant. "Yeah." As he walked past her to go to their son, he leaned in and whispered so softly she barely heard it, the words brushing against her ear like a secret. You still take my breath away. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, gripping the edge of the doorway to steady herself. When she opened them again, Armin was kneeling beside Arav, his large hands gently helping their son find the toy car that had slipped from his grasp. The warmth of that sight, the simple paternal tenderness of it, made her chest ache again. The kind of dull, persistent ache that comes from a love you can't name anymore. She turned away from them and walked back toward the window. Outside, the rain was finally beginning to clear, and weak sunlight was starting to break through the clouds. For a brief, fragile second, the world felt perfectly still, balanced precariously between what was gone and what might, just possibly, return. Some feelings, she realized, never really fade. They just wait, patiently, in the quiet spaces, for the right moment to breathe again. The house fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty, but heavy, warm, and alive. It was filled with unspoken words, breaths held too long, and hearts beating just a little too fast. Arav sat on the rug, humming softly as he built his toy city. The gentle sound filled the room. Beside him, Armin pretended to help, but his eyes kept drifting. Toward the hallway, toward the faint sound of Lena moving behind her door. In her room, Lena brushed her hair slowly. She'd changed into a loose cotton dress, her shoulders still damp from the shower. She tried to focus on simple things, the sound of the comb, the rustle of the fabric, but her heart wouldn't listen. She could still feel that moment in the hallway. His eyes, the silence, the way time seemed to stop for both of them. Armand looked at the little city they'd built from plastic blocks. "Your city looks strong," he said to Arav, managing a smile. The boy nodded proudly. "It's for Mommy, so she never feels lonely again." The words caught Armin completely off guard. "Lonely?" he asked gently. Arav looked up, his expression serious. "Sometimes she looks out the window at night. I think she misses you." Armin froze, unable to speak. The innocence in the boy's voice was like a physical blow, simple, honest, and devastatingly true. He blinked hard, forcing a small smile. "Maybe she just likes the stars," he whispered. But deep down, he knew. He knew. Just then, Lena walked into the room. Her hair was half dry, her dress flowing softly around her knees. "What are you two building?" she asked. Her tone was calm, but her voice was softer, more fragile than usual. "A city for you, Mommy," Arav shouted with delight. "Daddy helped." Lena smiled, her gaze falling on the small blocks. "It's beautiful," she said. As she reached down to fix one of the pieces, her fingers brushed lightly against Armand's hand. Both of them froze, a spark of memory, of history, rushing through that tiny touch. Lena straightened up quickly. "Arav, sweetheart," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Why don't you go get your crayons? You can draw your city on paper." "Okay," he yelled, running off with a burst of excitement. And just like that, it was only them again. Silence descended, thick and charged. For a few long moments, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house. Armin was the first to break it. "You've done a good job," he said softly, his eyes full of admiration. "He's happy. He's kind. You raised him well." Lena's gaze softened. "We raised him," she corrected gently. "Even when you weren't here, he had your stories, your photos. He always knew his father loved him." Armin swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to breathe. "And you? Did you know I still—" She stopped him, a small, sad shake of her head. "Please, Armin, don't." He let out a shaky breath, his voice trembling. "I can't pretend anymore. I saw you this morning, and everything I tried to bury came rushing back. The way you smile, the way you move, even the way you look at me. It's like no time has passed at all." Lena looked down, her own voice quiet but firm. "Time has passed, Armin. We just didn't move with it." He stood up slowly, closing the small distance that separated them. "Maybe we can start again." She took a slight step back, a wall going up. And what about everything that broke us? The nights you didn't come home? The words we said that can't be unsaid. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them, the ticking of a clock the only sound speaking for them. Then softly he said, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was far away, even when I was stupid and selfish, you were still there, every single day. Lena felt her throat tighten. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Love isn't always enough, Arman, she whispered. Sometimes it hurts more than it heals. He nodded slowly, his eyes pleading. Then let it hurt. But please don't hide from it. For a long moment they just stood there, two hearts suspended in one heavy silence. Lena finally exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect to make everything right. I'm not trying to make it right, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I just want to be here, to be near you, to be near him, even if it's only for a little while. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the man who left, but the one who came back, trying to make amends without knowing the words. Maybe, she said slowly, thoughtfully, some doors open again for a reason, but that doesn't mean we should just step right back through them. Arman's eyes softened with a flicker of hope. Then let me stand at the door a little longer. A smile touched both their lips, tired, sad, but real. From the hallway, Arav's cheerful, innocent voice called out, Mommy, Daddy, come see my drawing. Lena turned toward the sound, her own lips trembling into a faint smile. He's calling us. Arman nodded. He always brings us back. As they walked together toward their son, their hands brushed against each other, not by accident this time. It was a light, fleeting touch, but it was enough. Enough to remind them that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It only waits, quietly, patiently, inside the heartbeat of silence. Thank you so much for joining. The world outside felt freshly scrubbed, the sky a brilliant, clear blue after the rain. A warm golden light spilled through the windows, making the dust motes dance in the air. The little house was quiet, a still peaceful kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. Over by the window, Arav sat lost in his own world. His crayons moved in quick, happy strokes, bringing to life a drawing of Mommy, Daddy, and me. Across the room, Arman and Lena occupied opposite ends of the living space, sitting on separate couches. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was filled with unspoken words, with years of things left unsaid. Lena stared into her teacup, her reflection wavering on the surface of the cold liquid. Arman watched her, his fingers tapping a restless, anxious rhythm against his knee, a beat that betrayed the calm expression on his face. The only sounds were the distant, steady tick of a clock and the gentle rustle of the breeze against the curtains. Finally, the silence broke. You should go soon, Lena said, her voice even, almost too even. It's getting late. But underneath that calm surface, there was a tremor, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or maybe the quiet plea of a heart that didn't truly want him to leave. Arman's gaze met hers. Lena, he said, his voice soft, gentle. Please don't do that. Do what? She asked, her eyes still fixed on her cup. Pretend this doesn't mean anything. She placed the cup down on the coaster with a soft click. Arman, don't start. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. I'm not starting anything, I'm trying to end the silence. Lena let out a long, slow breath, her posture stiffening. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been said. Yes, there is, he insisted, his voice firm but not harsh. You can lie to yourself all you want, but I saw the way you looked at me this morning, when I first walked in, and I know what I felt too. She shot up from the couch, her movements sharp and sudden, and began to pace towards the window where Arav was still happily coloring. You're misunderstanding things, we're just two people still in love, he finished for her, standing up to face her. The words hung in the air, landing with the force of a physical blow. Lena froze, her back still to him. Don't, she whispered, her voice fragile. Please don't say that. Armin took a deliberate step forward. Why not? Because it's true? Because it scares you? Her hands began to tremble, and she clenched them into fists at her sides. It's not about fear. It's about reality. We're different now. Our lives are different. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words. Yes, but feelings don't obey time, Lena. They don't follow the rules we set for them. She finally turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Do you think this is easy for me? She asked, her voice cracking with emotion. To see you here in this house? To feel everything I worked so hard to bury start to come alive again? She took a shaky breath. I built this peace with my own 2 hands, Armin. Piece by painful piece after you left. I can't lose it again. He moved closer, closing the gap between them until he was standing just a few feet away. And what if it's not peace, Lena? What if it's just silence? A silence you've learned to live with. Her eyes blinked rapidly, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. You don't get to say that, she retorted, her voice thick. You weren't here. I know, he said, and for the first time his own voice broke. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. He was close now. Too close. The air between them crackled, charged with a raw, undeniable energy. Lena had to tilt her head back to look up at him. Her voice was barely a whisper, a breath of a question. Why did you really come back today? Armand's intense gaze softened. His eyes filled with a profound sadness and a sliver of hope. Because I missed my son, he said honestly. He paused, his eyes searching hers. But also because I couldn't stop missing you. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, ragged sound that cut through the quiet tension of the room. You don't mean that. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers. There was no flicker of doubt, no hesitation. I do, he said, his voice low but firm, each word a stone dropped into the still water of her heart. Every single word. She took a shaky step back, the hardwood floor cold beneath her feet. The distance between them felt both too vast and not nearly enough. Armin, stop. Please, you're just confusing things. It was a plea, a desperate attempt to rebuild the walls he was so determined to tear down. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound certainty. No, Lena, I'm not confusing them. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a sad, knowing expression. I'm finally remembering them, as if summoned by the storm brewing inside them. A faint rumble of thunder echoed in the far distance. It was a low, mournful sound, a reminder of tempests past and the one currently raging in this small, quiet house. Lena turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. She hid her face, her hand coming up to cover her mouth as if to hold back the words, the emotions that threatened to spill out. You think love is enough? She asked, her voice muffled. You think it's enough to just erase all the pain? To forget what happened between us? No, he whispered, the sound so soft she almost missed it. He had moved closer, his presence a warmth at her back. I don't think it can erase it, but it's enough to forgive it. The words hung in the air, trembling, fragile, yet carrying an impossible weight. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the soft, innocent humming of their son, Arav, from the other room. His voice, a pure, untroubled melody, floated through the house like a fragile reminder of what they once were, of the life they had built before it all came crashing down. Then slowly, as if moving through water, Lena turned back to face him. Her eyes were a maelstrom of emotion, unshed tears shimmering, anger burning, and a deep, soul-aching longing all mixed into one devastating look. You broke me, Armin, she said, the words raw and torn from her. You completely shattered me. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the silence. The truth of her words hit him, and he didn't flinch from it. I know, he admitted, his own voice laced with a pain that mirrored hers. And I'm here to help you heal, even if I know I can't be the one to fix it. She looked down at her hands, which were twisting together in her lap. Her voice shook, betraying the strength she tried so hard to project. And what if I don't want to open that wound again? What if it's too much to bear? Then I'll stay outside the door, he said quietly, his voice a steady promise. I won't push, I won't demand, but I won't walk away this time. I'm not leaving you again. The frantic, panicked rhythm of her heart began to slow, just slightly. It was as if his quiet vow had calmed a fraction of the storm inside her. Lena stared at him, really looked at him, at the man who had once been her everything and then, in the blink of an eye, had become her nothing. Her heart, that foolish, traitorous muscle, screamed at her to run into his arms, to seek the comfort that was once so familiar. But her mind, scarred and cautious, screamed even louder to stay still, to protect herself from being broken a second time. Finally, she spoke. Her tone was fragile like thin glass, but underpinned with a new firmness. You don't get to decide this alone, Armin. You can't just reappear in our lives and stir all of this up again. I'm not here to stir anything, he replied, his gaze earnest. I'm here because even after everything that's happened, after all the time and all the pain, when I look at you, Lena, I still see my home. The confession was a direct hit. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, blurring his image. She fought to keep her voice steady. Then maybe your home moved on without you. He took a deep, steadying breath, his shoulders rising and falling. He didn't argue, he didn't fight her, he simply yielded. Then let me just stand outside of it. I'm not asking to enter, not trying to claim anything. I just need to know that it's still there. That you're still there. At his words, something in Lena's expression softened. The hard edges of her anger began to fade, replaced by something much more vulnerable. It was sorrow, yes, but beneath it, like a stubborn spring flower pushing through frozen ground, was a love that had refused to die, hiding beneath years of old, carefully tended pain. She turned away from him again, a faint whisper escaping her lips. You always knew what to say. A gentle, sad smile touched his face. And you, he said softly, always knew how to make me mean it. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, making the curtains flutter lightly as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. For a long moment, they just stood there, suspended in a fragile truce. They both knew this argument had no winner, no loser, because the messy, beautiful, devastating logic of love defied any simple conclusion. Then, cutting through the heavy silence, Arav's bright voice called out from the living room. Mommy, Daddy, come draw with me. It was a lifeline. They both exhaled at the same time, a shared, unconscious release of tension that had been coiled between them for years. The weight on their shoulders seemed to melt away just for a second into the quiet air. Lena wiped a stray tear from her cheek and managed a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He's calling us again. Armin's own smile was faint, but it was there. He always knows when to save us, doesn't he? And with that unspoken understanding, they walked toward the sound of their son's voice. They moved together side by side, but with a careful space between them, not as lovers and not yet as strangers, but as two souls standing on the precipice of something new and unnamed, a future they couldn't yet define. Behind them, on the small kitchen table, 2 cups of tea sat cold and untouched. They were silent symbols of everything they hadn't said, of the conversation left unfinished, and a quiet promise of everything still waiting to be spoken. Dinner had ended quietly. Arav was half asleep on the couch, his little head resting against a pillow, a picture book open on his lap. The home smelled of soap and warm food. It felt like peace, a fragile, borrowed peace. I stood by the sink, drying a plate. My movements were slow, almost careful, as if I was afraid that one sudden sound might wake the past again. Behind me, Armin cleared his throat. Do you need help? I shook my head without turning. No, I'm fine. But he stayed anyway, leaning on the counter, watching the steam curl up from the sink. The silence stretched between us, soft but heavy. Finally, he spoke. There's something I never told you. The real reason I left. The dish in my hand stopped halfway to the shelf. Armin, I know, he interrupted gently. You don't want to hear excuses, but it wasn't about you, or us. It was me. I was scared. He looked down, searching for words simple enough to carry so much regret. I'd lost my job that year. I didn't tell you because I felt useless. Every time you smiled at me, I felt smaller. I thought leaving would give you and Arav a better chance. I told myself I'd come back once I fixed everything, but days turned into months. I turned slowly, my eyes calm but shining. You should have trusted me. I know, he whispered. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was make you raise him alone. The plate clicked softly as I set it on the counter. My voice trembled, yet it held no anger, only years of tired love. I waited, Armin. Every night I told Arav you were busy, that you'd come soon. He stopped asking after a while, and when he stopped, that's when I cried. He lowered his head. I don't deserve either of you. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped closer. No, I said softly. You don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe you deserve a chance to learn what it means. He looked up, surprised. After everything? I'm not saying yes, I replied. I'm saying I don't want to hate you anymore. My words hung between us like fragile glass. Armin swallowed hard. I never stopped loving you, Lena. Even when I couldn't face you, I carried you everywhere. Every birthday I missed, every night he called your name in his sleep, it haunted me. I kept your photo in my wallet even when I thought I'd never come back. I took a slow breath. Then why now? Why come back after all this time? Because I saw your photo online, he said quietly. Arav's smile looked just like mine, and I realized he might grow up thinking his father didn't care. I couldn't let that be his story. My eyes softened. He still needs you, I admitted. But being a father isn't about just showing up, it's about staying. I will, Armin said firmly. Even if you never take me back, I'll still be here for him. That's my promise. The clock struck 8. Arav stirred on the couch, whispering, Daddy? Armin went to him, kneeling. I'm here, buddy. The boy smiled sleepily and drifted off again. I watched the scene quietly. Something in my heart shifted, still cautious but lighter than it had been in years. I walked to the doorway. You can stay for dinner tomorrow if you want, I said softly. He'll like that. Armin looked up, startled. Are you sure? I nodded. It's not for us. It's for him. But maybe it can help us too. He stood slowly, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. Thank you. I gave a faint smile. Don't thank me yet, just prove it. He moved toward the door, putting on his jacket. Before stepping out, he turned back. Lena, he said gently. For what it's worth, I never found peace anywhere else. I met his gaze. Then maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you rebuild. Armin nodded slowly, understanding. Then I'll start with that. I closed the door after him and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. My eyes lifted toward the quiet home, the toys on the floor, our sleeping boy, the warm light. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like possibility. Arav was fast asleep again, his crayon drawing folded carefully under his arm like a tiny, priceless treasure. Lena gently pulled the blanket up to his chin, her hand lingering for a moment. She watched him breathe, the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his small chest. Each breath felt like a quiet promise that life, despite everything, was still moving forward. Behind her, the front door clicked open, a soft sound in the otherwise silent house. Armin had come back. He'd forgotten his umbrella on the porch. His footsteps paused just inside the doorway when he saw her standing by the couch, the warm glow of the lamplight creating a soft halo around her. He spoke in a low voice, careful not to break the stillness. I didn't mean to disturb you. You didn't, she answered, her back still to him. He's finally asleep. They stood there in the half-lit room, suspended in the quiet. The difficult conversation from earlier, the one filled with old wounds and new tensions, still hung in the air between them, unfinished but somehow no longer angry. Armand set the dripping umbrella against the wall. "Thank you," he said, his voice earnest, "for letting me come back tomorrow." Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on her son. "It's for Arav." "I know." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "But it means more than you think." The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked on, each second falling into the silence. Somewhere outside, a lone dog barked, and then the world fell quiet again. Lena finally turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You really want to change, don't you?" "I do," he said simply. There was no grand declaration, no flourish. No big promises this time, just small ones I can keep. She folded her arms, a familiar protective gesture. She thought for a moment, then said, "You were always so good with words. I used to believe every single one of them." He nodded slowly, accepting the weight of her memory. "And then I stopped earning them. I don't expect you to believe me now. Not yet. But I'll be here. I'll show you." Her eyes, which had been so guarded, softened in spite of herself. "Armin, why? Why do you still care so much?" He hesitated, searching for the truest words he could find. "Because you were my beginning," he answered, his voice raw with honesty. "Everything good that was ever in me. It started with you." The words landed gently and painfully, all at once. Lena looked down, biting her lip, feeling the sting of what was and the ache of what could have been. Needing something to do with her hands, she moved toward the small side table and poured water into 2 glasses, the sound of it filling the quiet room. Armin came and stood beside her. For a long moment, they both just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at their fragmented reflections in the still water. "It's strange," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "We used to talk about the future so much. We had it all planned out. Now it feels like we're 2 people from completely different stories, just trying to share the same page." "Maybe," he replied, his gaze meeting hers in the reflection. "Maybe that's how new stories begin." A small ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You always had a line ready for everything." "And you," he countered gently, "always had the last word." And then it happened. They both laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a quiet, shared sound that hadn't been heard between them in years. It didn't erase the past, it didn't heal the scars, but it softened the edges, like a warm, gentle rain falling on dry, cracked earth. Lena took a sip of water, the cool glass a steadying presence in her hand. "Do you ever think about what we could have been?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "If we had just stayed kind to each other?" "All the time," Armin answered without hesitation. "But maybe we had to break to learn how to be gentle." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time, she didn't see the man who left. She saw the man who was trying, with every fiber of his being, to understand how to come back. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," she admitted, the words heavy with truth. "You don't have to," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Just forgive the part of me that's trying now." The air between them shifted. It wasn't romance, and it wasn't the familiar distance they'd grown so used to. It was something new, something in between. Recognition. A quiet acknowledgement of the journey they were both on. Armin moved toward the door, picking up his umbrella again. "I should go. You need to rest." She nodded. "Yes." But her voice lacked its usual certainty. He opened the door halfway and paused, turning back one last time. "Good night, Lena." She looked over at her sleeping son, a tiny anchor in her tumultuous world, and then back at the man standing in the doorway. "Good night." As he stepped out into the night, a gust of wind carried the smell of wet earth and fresh rain into the room. Lena closed her eyes and breathed it in. It smelled fresh, honest, real. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if this was a new beginning or just a peaceful pause. But for the first time in a very long time, She felt the pull of hope. Quiet, unspoken, but undeniably strong. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting gentle lines across the living room floor. The smell of toast and tea drifted through the small house. It was the kind of calm morning Lena hadn't felt in years. Arav sat at the table, his small legs swinging beneath the chair, carefully buttering a slice of bread. His face was bright, his laughter unguarded and free. Across from him, Armin poured milk into a cup, his movements slow and careful, as if not to spill a single drop or disturb the fragile peace. Lena entered the room quietly, tying her hair into a loose knot. She stopped just for a moment when she saw them, father and son, leaning close together, whispering about something that made them both smile. For the first time, it didn't feel strange. It felt right. "Good morning," she said softly. Both of them looked up at the sound of her voice. "Morning, Mommy," Arav chirped, his voice full of sunshine. "Morning," Armin added, a warm, genuine smile on his face. "We made breakfast. Well, mostly him." Lena's own lips curved into a faint smile. "That's new." They ate together in an easy silence, not the heavy, loaded silence of the past, but a comfortable one, filled with the quiet sounds of a family rediscovering its rhythm, the simple clink of spoons against mugs. When the meal was over, Arav jumped up from his chair, full of energy. "Can we go to the park today?" Lena hesitated, glancing toward the window. It might rain again. "I don't mind rain," he said, grinning from ear to ear. Armin chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "Neither do I. I still remember when you used to run out just to smell the first drops." Lena raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in her expression. "You remember everything, don't you?" "Only the good parts," he said, his voice soft. Later that morning, the three of them walked down the small lane toward the park. The sky was cloudy but kind, holding its breath. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the swings in the distance. Arav ran ahead, his shoes splashing through puddles left by last night's rain, a beacon of pure joy. Lena watched him, her smile soft and unguarded now. "He looks so happy." Armin nodded, his eyes also fixed on their son. "He should always look like that." They found an empty bench near a flowering tree. For a while they just sat, listening to the world, watching their child play. Every few minutes their eyes met briefly, and each time it felt less like an accident and more like a quiet acknowledgement. "You know," Armin said quietly, breaking the silence, "I used to imagine mornings like this. I'd picture us sitting somewhere peaceful, just talking about nothing important." Lena looked at him from the side. "And now that you have it?" He smiled, a small, almost sad smile. "Now I wish I'd imagined it sooner." She looked away, but the corners of her mouth curved upwards. They watched Arav climb the slide again and again, fearless and determined. "He's growing fast," Armin murmured. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes I feel like time is running ahead of me, like he'll be taller than me before I'm ready." He turned toward her, his expression serious. "You've done so well, Lena. Better than I ever could have." Her eyes softened. The defensiveness she usually carried around him seemed to melt away. "You're here now. That counts for something." Their hands rested on the bench between them, so close, almost touching. The wind lifted a lock of her hair, brushing it gently against his sleeve. The moment felt small yet enormous, filled with everything that was unsaid. "Armin," she said, after a long pause, her voice barely a whisper, "do you think people really change?" He considered her question. "I think they can learn," he answered. "And maybe that's enough." She nodded slowly, processing his words. "Learning takes time. I'm not in a hurry," he said gently. "I just want to be part of the lesson." That made her laugh, a quiet, genuine sound. "You and your words again." "Maybe they're all I have left," he admitted, his voice laced with a raw honesty. "No," she said, finally turning to look at him fully. You have a chance, and chances speak louder than words. Just then, Arav ran back to them, his face beaming, holding a tiny yellow flower in his hand. For you, Mommy. She knelt down to take it, her smile wide and bright. It's beautiful, sweetheart. He then turned to his father. Daddy, you get one too. Armand bent down, his eyes wide with mock surprise. Really? Yep. You both have to keep them till we go home. He carefully tucked the small, fragile flower into his shirt pocket. Deal. As they walked back later, Arav skipped ahead, singing a tune of his own invention. The road was still wet, and their reflections followed them like gentle ghosts. At the door to their small house, Lena paused. Would you like some tea before you go? Armand smiled, a wave of relief washing over his face. I'd like that. Inside, the kettle began to boil, the room filled with the familiar, comforting scent of fresh leaves and steam. They sat by the window, 2 cups between them, as the world outside glowed in the soft, gray light. Lena traced a finger along the rim of her cup. Today felt normal, she said. He nodded. Maybe that's the beginning of something. She looked at him for a long second, her gaze steady. Let's not name it yet. All right, he said, his smile easy and patient. We'll just let it grow. Arav's laughter echoed from the next room, a vibrant sound that filled the small home with life. Lena leaned back in her chair, her eyes on the window, watching tiny droplets of rain race down the glass. Armand followed her gaze. You always loved the rain. She nodded. It hides tears and brings flowers. I like things that can do both. He looked at her quietly, and for once, words failed him. There was no need for them. Between the rain, the tea, and the steady heartbeat of the house, something fragile but real was returning. A spark, not of old romance, but of something far more precious. Trust. The very first light after a long dark night. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Your support helps us create more content like this. See you in the next one. The day slipped quietly into evening. The house was warm, filled with the faint scent of rain-soaked air and freshly made tea. Arav had fallen asleep again, too tired from running around the park. His toy car rested in his small hand like a dream he refused to let go. I stood near the window, watching the sky fade into shades of pink and gray. The world outside seemed calm, but my thoughts moved like waves inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Armand's smile from earlier, gentle, hopeful, and dangerously familiar. Behind me, Armand was tidying the table, stacking cups quietly. His movements were slow, careful, as if he didn't want to break the new peace we had found. Thanks for the tea, he said softly. It reminded me of the old days. I turned halfway, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Except now it's better. No sugar accidents. He laughed quietly. I never learned how to stir properly. I chuckled, shaking my head. You used to make such a mess. That's true, he said, his voice warm. But you always cleaned it up without complaining. That yes, because I knew you'd burn the kitchen if I didn't at tea. We both laughed again softly, a sound that filled the air like something once lost returning home. After a while, silence returned. Not cold, not awkward, just still. The kind of silence that holds 2 people close even without words. I turned back to the window. It's strange, I said quietly. Everything feels familiar but also new. Like I'm walking through the same house, but every door leads somewhere different now. Armand nodded, standing a few steps behind me. Maybe that's what second chances feel like. I smiled faintly. Second chances? Yeah, he said. They're not about starting over. They're about continuing, with more care this time. I thought about that, my eyes tracing the rain marks on the glass. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of care again. He took a careful step closer, not touching me, just enough for his reflection to appear beside mine in the window. I'm not asking for answers tonight, just honesty. I looked at his reflection instead of turning. Then here's honesty, I said softly. You still make my heart race, and that scares me. Armand's breath caught, his voice barely a whisper. It scares me too. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then I stepped back, turning toward him. You shouldn't stay too late, I said quietly. Arav's asleep. It's been a long day. Armand nodded. You're right. But his voice said otherwise. He looked around the room, the soft light, the quiet hum of a home that used to be his. Lena, he said, I don't want to rush anything, but being here, it feels like breathing again. I met his eyes. And what happens when you stop feeling that? Then I'll stay anyway, he said simply. My lips parted slightly, but no words came. My heart was loud, my thoughts quiet. Armand took one more step closer, not enough to touch, but enough for warmth to cross the space between us. Do you want me to leave? He asked gently. I hesitated. I don't know, I whispered. He smiled sadly. That's better than a no. The sound of rain began again, a soft patter on the roof like the sky remembering something tender. Armand moved toward the door, picking up his jacket. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it from the hook. The touch was light, accidental, yet it sent a quiet current through both of us. Our eyes met. Neither spoke. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The rain, the wind, the ticking clock, all faded into the background. It was just us standing inches apart, every unspoken word shimmering in the space between. I was the one who looked away first. Good night, Armand. He took a breath, steady and soft. Good night, Lena. He stepped outside, pausing for a second under the porch light. See you tomorrow, he said. I nodded. Tomorrow. When the door closed, the house felt both emptier and fuller at the same time. I leaned against it, closing my eyes. I could still feel the warmth of his nearness, still hear the rhythm of his quiet voice. In the corner, Arav turned in his sleep, mumbling softly, Daddy? I smiled through the ache. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. Daddy's here now. I walked back to the window and looked out into the dark street. The reflection in the glass showed a woman no longer broken, just uncertain, but brave enough to feel again. Outside, Armand stood under the rain for a moment longer before walking away, each step slow, deliberate, hopeful. And though neither of us said it aloud, we both felt the same quiet truth settle inside us. Sometimes love doesn't need to be rebuilt. Sometimes it only needs to be remembered. Let me know in the comments what you think about second chances. See you next time. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, a pale, hazy glow that promised a new day. I found myself moving through the kitchen with the stealth of a cat, trying not to wake Arav. In the hush of the early morning, every sound seemed amplified. The gentle clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup, the low, expectant whistle of the kettle, each noise felt like a shout in the stillness. Today was Armand's last day. He was heading back to work, leaving our fragile, newly rebuilt world behind. He'd promised to visit again soon, but soon was a word that hung in the air, undefined and uncertain. Would it be days? Weeks? Months? The not knowing sat like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. Just then a soft knock on the door broke the spell of the morning. Armand stood on the threshold, a small bag in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. A faint scent of rain and damp earth clung to him. Morning, he said, his voice just above a whisper. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. We stood in the doorway for a beat, a little awkward, the unspoken words thick between us. I didn't want to leave without saying thank you, he said finally, breaking the silence. I needed to tell you in person. I managed a small nod. You already said that last night. A faint smile touched his lips. I know, but some words sound truer in the daylight. We moved to the kitchen table, the same table where laughter from the day before seemed to linger in the air. The house felt smaller now, tighter, as if it sensed the impending departure. Armin placed the folded paper on the table. "I wrote this for Arav," he explained. "Stories, little ones. He can read one each night before he sleeps." I carefully unfolded the page. My heart softened as I saw the tiny, hand-drawn rockets and whimsical trees scribbled in the margins. It was so quintessentially him. "He's going to love this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I hope so," he replied, his gaze earnest. I wanted him to have a piece of me here, to remember that even when I'm away, I'm still listening to his stories. I looked up from the drawings, my eyes meeting his. "And what about me?" The question slipped out, quieter than I'd intended. Armin's gaze was slow and deliberate. "You never stopped being a part of my story, Lena." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with everything we couldn't yet put into words, the apologies, the regrets, the fragile hope for a future. I was the first to speak. "You've changed, Armin." "Maybe I just started seeing clearly," he said, a hint of old pain in his voice. "When you lose everything that matters, your eyes learn to see much faster." A sad smile touched my lips. "Don't lose it again." "I won't," he promised, and the sincerity in his voice was a balm to my soul. For a fleeting moment, the weight in the room lifted. It felt like the calm before a new beginning, a fresh start. But the ticking clock on the wall was a steadfast reminder that our time was running out. "When's your train?" I asked, pulling us back to the present. "In an hour." I nodded. "You should probably get going soon." He stood up, but his movements were slow, reluctant. His eyes swept across the room one last time, taking in every detail: the little table, the children's drawings taped to the fridge, Arav's tiny shoes by the door. Each object was a whisper of a memory, a ghost of what we'd shared. "I thought leaving again would be easier this time," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "It's not." I hugged my arms to my chest, a subconscious effort to hold myself together. "Maybe that's a good thing." He searched my face as if looking for an answer he desperately needed. "Will you write to me?" A small, playful smile crept onto my face. "Maybe," I teased gently. "Maybe not. You'll just have to keep visiting to find out." "I will." He stepped closer, closing the distance until only a breath of space remained between us. "Thank you," he said again, his voice low and intimate, "for letting me try to make things right." My eyes glistened with unshed tears, but I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "You're welcome. Just don't disappear again." "I won't," he whispered, a solemn vow. I finally found the road back. The clock ticked on, a steady, indifferent rhythm. Outside, a distant car horn broke the quiet intimacy of the moment, pulling us back to reality. He picked up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder, and gave me one last, long look. No more words were needed. A simple nod between us conveyed 1,000 unspoken emotions. I walked him to the door. The cool morning air, fresh with the scent of damp earth, greeted us. He paused on the step, turning back halfway. "Tell Arav I'll call tonight," he said. "I will." "And Lena," he started, then stopped, the rest of the sentence lost behind his eyes. But I knew. I finished it for him. "I know." We shared one final look, quiet, steady, and filled with a profound sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of an ending, but the gentle, hopeful peace of mutual understanding. A new chapter was beginning. I watched as Armin walked down the lane, his figure growing smaller with each step until he disappeared around the corner. I closed the door, leaning my back against it, and let out a long, shuddering breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just then, a small voice called from the living room. "Mommy?" I went to Arav, smoothing the sleep-tousled hair from his forehead. "Daddy had to go to work, sweetheart, but he's going to call you tonight." A sleepy smile spread across his face. "He'll come back?" "Yes," I said softly, kissing his forehead. He'll come back. My gaze drifted around the quiet house. It no longer felt empty or lonely. It felt expectant, alive with the faint, warm promise of something new, something that could grow again. I picked up the folded pages Armin had left and placed them carefully on a bookshelf. The first page had a title, "For My Little Boy and the Woman Who Taught Me Courage." A smile broke through my tears. The morning light streamed in, touching the empty cup he had used, a small testament to his presence. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone, "Goodbye doesn't have to mean forever." A pale, golden glow crept across the floorboards. The house still carried a faint chill from the night before, but it smelled of calm, fresh air, paper, and the promise of a new day. I stirred awake before the alarm. For a few seconds I forgot where I was in the story of my own life. Then the memory returned. The conversation, the goodbye, the door closing. A quiet ache settled inside me, not sharp like before, but gentle, like a reminder of something real. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. The kettle clicked on. Steam rose. Outside, the world was still washed in silver light. I poured coffee into a cup and sat by the window. The seat across from me was empty, yet it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful, as if silence had changed shape overnight. Arav's footsteps padded down the hallway. His hair was messy, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Mommy," he mumbled. "Morning, sweetheart." I opened my arms and he climbed into my lap. We stayed like that for a while, just watching the light grow stronger. The sound of distant traffic began to stir, the world waking up again. Arav yawned. "Daddy called?" he asked. "Not yet," I said softly, brushing his hair back. "But he will." He nodded, content. "He said we'll go see the trains next time." I smiled. I think he meant it. On the table lay the folded paper Arman had left, the bedtime stories. Arav pointed to it. "Can we read one now?" I hesitated just for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. Let's see which one's first." I unfolded it carefully. At the top, in Arman's familiar handwriting, it read, "The Little Rocket That Found Its Way Home." I began to read aloud. My voice was calm and steady, surprising even myself. Arav listened, eyes wide, following every word. It was a simple story, about a rocket that got lost among the stars and learned to follow the smallest lights to find its way back. When I reached the last line, I paused. Arav whispered, "That's Daddy's story, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe it's ours." After breakfast, I tidied the kitchen, humming without realizing. The tune wasn't anything special, just something I used to hum years ago when I cooked beside Armin. The memory didn't hurt this time. It simply lived quietly inside me, a gentle echo. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. Arav scrambled to pick it up. "Daddy!" he shouted, his voice full of pure joy. I could hear Armin's laugh on the other end, bright and real. "Hey, buddy, did you read the story?" "Yes, the rocket came home," he exclaimed. "That's my favorite one," Armin said warmly. "Be good for Mommy, okay? I'll see you soon." "I will." Arav handed the phone to me. My heart beat a little faster for a second. "Hi," Armin said quietly. "Hi," I answered. "You reach safe?" "Yeah, the train's noisy, but it's fine. I wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. Neither of us knew what to add that wouldn't sound too much or too little. Finally, I said, "He's happy. You made him really happy." "That makes me happy too," he replied. "Thank you for letting me." "You don't need to thank me, Armin. Just keep your promise." "I will." The line went quiet again. Then he said softly, "Tell him I love him." "I will." "And Lena?" "Yes?" "Take care of yourself too." "I'm learning how," I said. We both smiled. I could feel it through the silence. Then the call ended. I stood by the window watching a light drizzle begin to fall. Arav had gone back to his drawing. Crayons scattered across the floor. The small home felt warm, alive with simple, comforting sounds. The scratch of a crayon on paper, the soft patter of rain on the glass, the steady rhythm of our heartbeats. I whispered to myself, maybe this is what healing sounds like. Later that afternoon, I opened the window wider. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clear and cool. Sunlight spilled onto the table where Armin's stories lay waiting. I placed a small flower in a cup beside them, a quiet symbol, something gentle, something new. Arav looked up from his art. "Mommy, what are you thinking?" I smiled at him. "Just that everything feels a little brighter today." He nodded seriously. "Because Daddy found us again." I laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe we found him too." He grinned and went back to coloring. I sat there watching him, my heart feeling full and calm. The day outside glowed with a soft light, the kind that comes after a long storm, neither sharp nor loud, just steady. I looked once more at the empty chair across from me. This time, it no longer looked empty at all. It held memory, promise, and space for whatever would come next. With a deep breath, I whispered, "Some endings aren't really ends. They're just mornings that took a little longer to arrive." Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more moments of reflection and hope. See you next time.